For years, my family's demands cut colder than any winter wind, but when they finally came knocking on my door, they found I had learned to weaponize the frost. The cold wasn't the worst part. I mean, it was bad. The kind of deep, damp cold that seeps into an old house's bones and never quite leaves. The kind you feel in your joints when you wake up in the morning. But no, the cold was just the setting. The worst part was the silence. The silence that followed a curt, "The boiler's making that noise again, Alex," or a dismissive, "The draft from the attic window is giving Mother a headache." There was never a please, and there was certainly never a thank you. There was just an expectation. I was the family handyman, the tech guy, the one who understood how things worked, and from November to March, I was the only one they ever seemed to remember existed. For years, that was my life. I'd get the call. My brother, Mark, the high-flying lawyer with hands as soft as his designer cashmere sweaters, would be on the other end of the line. He wouldn't ask how I was. He'd just state the problem. And I, like a fool, would drive the 2 hours to the ancestral home, the rambling, inefficient money pit they were all so proud of. I'd spend my weekend in the freezing basement coaxing a geriatric furnace back to life, or on a ladder in the biting wind sealing a window frame, my fingers numb and clumsy. They'd be inside, gathered around the one functioning fireplace, sipping mulled wine, their laughter a faint, mocking echo. They'd leave a plate of cold leftovers for me in the kitchen. That was my payment. The breaking point came 3 years ago. It was the week before Christmas. A pipe had burst in the upstairs bathroom, and I spent 48 straight hours with almost no sleep, ripping out drywall and soldering copper in a crawlspace that smelled of century-old dust and mouse droppings. I finally stumbled downstairs, covered in grime, exhausted but triumphant. "It's fixed," I announced to my parents, my brother, and my sister Sarah, who were decorating the tree. My father didn't even look up from hanging an ornament. "Good," he grunted. "Your mother was worried it would ruin the carpet." Mark just smirked. "Took you long enough. We almost had to call a real plumber." Something inside me just snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, cold severance. I walked out without a word, got in my car, and drove away. They didn't call to see if I was okay. The only text I got was from Sarah 2 days later. "Are you coming for Christmas dinner or not? Mom needs to know for the place settings." I typed back a single word, "No." And then I blocked every single one of them. For the next 2 years, I poured every ounce of that bitterness, every memory of freezing weekends and casual cruelty, into my work. I was a software developer, a profession my family openly mocked as playing on your computer. While Mark was arguing cases and Sarah was hosting charity luncheons, I was building something. A complex logistics algorithm that was, to put it mildly, revolutionary. I lived on coffee and code. I didn't date. I didn't go out. I just worked, and it paid off. A major shipping conglomerate bought my software for a price that made my eyes water. The number had so many zeros it looked like a joke. For the first time in my life, I had not just money, but power. The power of complete independence. The first thing I did was buy the house. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling, ultra-modern villa, nestled on a cliffside overlooking the ocean. It had floor-to-ceiling glass walls, heated marble floors, a home automation system I designed myself, and an infinity pool that was heated year-round. It was the antithesis of the cold, drafty mausoleum I grew up in. It was my fortress of solitude, my paradise. I moved in at the end of summer, and for 3 months I experienced a peace I had never known. Then November came. The first real cold snap of the year hit. I was sitting in my living room, a roaring fire in the sleek, minimalist fireplace, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift down past my panoramic windows. My phone, which had been blissfully silent for years, buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through from the same number. It was Mark. "Alex, pick up. It's an emergency. The boiler's out again." I stared at the message, a cold smile spreading across my face. I took a sip of my expensive scotch, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I typed a reply, short and sweet. "Sounds like a you problem." I then blocked the new number. Peace descended once more. An hour passed, then 2. I was just starting to drift off on the plush sofa when the motion sensor for my long, winding driveway pinged on my phone. I pulled up the security feed, frowning. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was my father's old Land Rover, crunching to a halt on the heated cobblestones. The doors opened, and out stepped my father, my brother Mark, and my sister's husband, Tom. They stood there for a moment, staring up at my magnificent home, their expressions a mixture of awe and raw, undisguised envy. Then Mark walked to the back of the car and pulled something out. It was a heavy-duty toolbox. He strode purposefully towards my front door, the others following like goons. I zoomed in the camera, my breath catching in my throat. Mark wasn't looking for a doorbell. He was pulling a long, thin piece of metal from a leather pouch, a tension wrench, and in his other hand, a set of lockpicks. They were going to try and break into my house. I sat there, motionless on my sofa, the glass of scotch frozen halfway to my lips. My entire world narrowed to the crisp, high-definition image on my phone. Mark, my arrogant, perfectly manicured brother, was hunched over my front door, fumbling with a lockpick like a common burglar. My father stood behind him, arms crossed, nodding with grim approval. Tom, my sister's oafish husband, was cupping his hands against the frosted glass panels beside the door, trying to peer inside. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just trespassing, it was a statement. It was them trying to force their way back into my life, using the same crude force of will they'd always used, assuming the locks would be as easy to bypass as my own self-respect had been. For a moment, pure, white-hot rage surged through me. My first instinct was to hit the panic button on my security app, the one that would dispatch the local police in under 3 minutes. My finger hovered over the icon. But then, a different feeling, something colder and far more satisfying, took its place. For years I had been reactive, scrambling to fix their problems on their terms. Now they were on my territory. They were playing my game, and the board was wired. They thought they were picking a simple lock. They had no idea they were trying to brute force their way into a digital fortress of my own design. I watched Mark's frustration grow. He jiggled the picks, muttering to himself, his breath pluming in the cold air. "It's not working," he finally hissed, straightening up. "What kind of lock is this?" My father stepped forward and rattled the handle. The solid thud of the magnetic lock engaging echoed faintly even through the triple-paned glass. "Just break it down, for God's sake," my father growled. Tom looked around, probably for a rock. This was their solution to everything. If you can't manipulate it, smash it. I leaned back, took a slow sip of my scotch, and pressed a single icon on my custom home control panel, the one labeled Welcome Committee. Outside, a small, discreet speaker next to the camera I was watching them through crackled to life. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, my voice calm and digitally clear, amplified into the cold night air. The three of them froze, spinning around to find the source of the sound. Mark squinted at the camera lens, his face a mask of shocked indignation. "Alex, what the hell is this? Open the door." "That's a funny way of asking," I said, allowing myself a small, tight smile. "Most people just use the doorbell. Then again, most people don't show up with a lock-picking set." My father pushed Mark aside, his face red with anger. "Alexander, stop this nonsense at once. Your mother is freezing and worried sick. The boiler is broken and you've been ignoring our calls." "The boiler in your house is not my problem," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "It hasn't been my problem for 3 years. You seem to have forgotten that." "This is a family emergency," Mark shouted, his lawyerly composure completely gone. "You have a responsibility." "A responsibility?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that felt alien coming from my own throat. Where was my family when I spent 48 hours in a crawl space so you could have a hot shower on Christmas morning? Where was the concern then? All I got was a cold plate of leftovers and a sneer about calling a real plumber. A stunned silence fell over them. They looked at each other for the first time, looking utterly lost. They had come here expecting the old Alex, the doormat, the one who would grumble but eventually cave. They were not equipped to handle this version of me. Tom, ever the genius, decided to try a different tactic. He walked over to one of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, the one I was sitting right behind. He pressed his face to the glass, trying to see past his own reflection in the dark. He couldn't see me, but I could see him perfectly. The faint outline of his stupid, gormless face, just feet away from me. That was the last straw. They weren't just at my door anymore. They were trying to breach my sanctuary, to put their greasy fingerprints all over my peace. "You have 1 minute to get back in your car and leave my property," I announced through the speaker, my voice now devoid of any warmth. "After that, I will consider you hostile intruders, and I will act accordingly." My father scoffed. "You wouldn't dare. We're your family." Mark pointed a finger at the camera. "You're bluffing, Alex. You don't have the guts." A countdown timer appeared on my phone screen. 60 seconds. I watched it tick down. 50, 40. They stood their ground, a united front of stubborn entitlement. 30. Mark started fiddling with the lockpicks again, as if in defiance. 20. My father was now yelling, his words indistinct threats about inheritance and respect. 10, 9, 8. I took a final, satisfying sip of my scotch. 3, 2, 1, 0. I pressed the second icon on the Welcome Committee panel. Suddenly, the night exploded in light and sound. A series of high-intensity, motion-tracking LED floodlights hidden in the soffits of the house blazed to life, pinning the three of them in harsh, clinical white beams. Simultaneously, a piercing alarm, a disorienting high-frequency siren I had designed specifically to be unbearable, blasted from a dozen hidden speakers around the perimeter of the house. They recoiled, crying out and shielding their eyes, caught like rats in a trap. They were blinded, deafened, and completely exposed. The timer on my phone reset and began to count up, logging every second of their illegal presence. But I wasn't done. They thought that was the worst of it. They had no idea what I had planned for Phase 2. The chaos was magnificent. From the silent, dark comfort of my living room, I had a perfect view of their panic. My father, who always projected an aura of unshakable authority, stumbled backward, hands clapped over his ears, his face a contorted mask of pain. Tom scrambled away from the window as if he'd been electrocuted, tripping over a decorative rock in the landscaping and landing hard on his backside. Mark was the only one still standing near the door, shielding his eyes with one arm, shouting something I couldn't hear over the deafening shriek of the siren. It was a symphony of comeuppance, and I was its conductor. I let them suffer for a full 60 seconds. I watched them stumble around the brilliantly lit driveway, disoriented and helpless. This wasn't just about getting them to leave. This was about dismantling the very foundation of their arrogance. They had come to my home expecting to find the same old drafty house, the same old pushover son, a place where their demands were law. Instead, they found a fortress, and I was making it excruciatingly clear that they had no power here. Their tools, their anger, their shouted commands, they were all useless against a few lines of code and a well-designed security system. After a minute that I'm sure felt like an eternity to them, I silenced the alarm. The sudden quiet was almost as jarring as the noise had been. The floodlights remained on, pinning them in place. They stood there, blinking, chests heaving, looking utterly defeated. "Are you ready to listen now?" My voice boomed from the speaker, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Mark finally lowered his arm, his eyes red and watering. "You're insane, Alex," he screamed, his voice hoarse. "This is assault." "No, Mark," I replied coolly. "Assault is what you were about to commit on my front door with those burglary tools. This is a non-lethal deterrent system, and you've only experienced the first tier. I assure you it gets much more persuasive." I let that threat hang in the air. My father finally found his voice, a low, guttural growl. "You turn these lights off and let us in right now. We'll forget this ever happened." The sheer nerve of it almost made me laugh. He was offering to forgive me. "There's nothing to forget, Dad. This is the new reality. My home has rules. Rule number 1, you are not welcome here, especially not when you show up unannounced in the middle of the night, armed with lockpicks to demand free labor." I paused, letting my words sink in. Now I'm going to repeat myself one last time. Get in your car and get off my property. They exchanged glances, a silent, frustrated communication passing between them. They were used to being in control, and the complete loss of it was clearly short-circuiting their brains. Tom scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his expensive trousers. It was then that my sister, Sarah, called. Her name flashed on my screen, and on impulse I patched her call through the external speaker system, putting her on blast for everyone to hear. "Mark, Dad, what is going on?" Her voice, tinny and laced with panic, echoed across the driveway. "Mom is having a fit. Did you get a hold of Alex? Is he coming to fix the boiler?" Before Mark could answer, I cut in. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice dripping with false cheerfulness. "Your welcoming party is right here on my doorstep. They seem to be having a little trouble with the entrance exam." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Alex! Oh, thank God. Please, you have to come. The house is like an icebox. Mom is wrapped in 3 blankets and she's shivering." "And that's my problem." "Why?" I asked, the question sharp and cold. "Sarah, for years, none of you gave a damn if I was freezing my hands to the bone in your basement. My comfort was never a consideration. Why should yours be my priority now?" "Because we're your family," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a mix of desperation and indignation. It was their mantra, their cure-all, the magic phrase they thought absolved them of all their sins. "That word doesn't mean what you think it means," I said softly, more to myself than to them. The temperature had been dropping steadily, and I could see their breath misting heavily under the glare of the floodlights. They looked cold. They looked miserable. And for the first time, I realized I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a profound cleansing emptiness. I had finally drained all the poison they had poured into me over the years. I decided it was time to end the show. "All right, playtime's over," I announced. "Phase 2 is commencing in 10 seconds. I strongly advise you to be inside your vehicle with the doors closed." Mark let out a derisive snort. "More empty threats, Alex? What are you going to do, play a loud noise at us again?" He was wrong. I wasn't going to play a noise. I had something far more elemental in mind. I watched the countdown on my phone. 10, 9, 8. They didn't move. They stood there, defiant, my father with his jaw set, Mark with a smirk on his face, a silent challenge. 5, 4, 3. "Last chance," I said through the speaker. They just stared at the camera. 2, 1. I pressed the icon. It was a simple pictogram of a snowflake. All around them, from nearly invisible nozzles integrated into the landscaping and the eaves of the house, a fine, powerful mist erupted with a loud hiss. For a split second, they just looked confused. Then the realization hit them. As the temperature of the mist, super chilled and atomized, instantly began to freeze on their clothes, their hair, and the ground beneath their feet. The state-of-the-art high-pressure sprinkler system designed for fire suppression was bathing them in a flash-freezing spray. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The super-cooled mist wasn't just water, it was a weaponized winter. It clung to their cashmere coats and designer jeans, flash-freezing the fabric, turning them stiff and brittle. A layer of slick, treacherous ice immediately formed on the heated cobblestones, the system overwhelming the driveway's warmth. My father yelped as his feet shot out from under him, and he went down hard, his cry of outrage swallowed by the hissing of the sprinklers. Tom, already off balance, slipped and slid into the Land Rover with a loud thud. Mark, caught in the direct path of a nozzle hidden in a shrub, was coated from head to toe in a sheen of white frost in seconds. He looked like a statue, sputtering and flailing as ice crystals formed on his eyebrows and hair. The system ran for exactly 15 seconds. That was all it took. When the hissing stopped, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. The 3 most arrogant men I had ever known were reduced to shivering, slipping fools on a self-made skating rink. The powerful floodlights made the ice glitter, turning my driveway into a cruel, sparkling stage for their humiliation. I watched, my face impassive, as my father struggled to get up, his hands unable to find purchase on the slick surface. Mark was frantically trying to brush the ice from his clothes, his movements clumsy and panicked. Then, through the speaker, I heard a new sound, a thin, reedy wail. It was my father. He wasn't yelling anymore, he was shivering violently, and it looked like he was crying. "Alex, please," he choked out, his voice pathetic and broken. "Turn it off, we'll go, just, please." For a split second, a flicker of the old Alex, the fixer, the dutiful son, stirred within me. It was a phantom limb, an echo of a person I no longer was. I squashed it mercilessly. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about consequences. I toggled the microphone one last time. "The sprinklers are off," I stated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "But the ice will remain. You have created your own obstacle. I suggest you navigate it carefully." Then I cut the audio feed. I switched off the floodlights, plunging them back into the cold, unforgiving darkness, lit only by the faint ambient glow from the distant street. My part in this was over. I watched on the night vision camera as they slowly, painfully helped each other up. It took them nearly 10 minutes to crab walk and slide their way back to the Land Rover. The engine roared to life, and the headlights cut a swath through the night. The car slid precariously as it backed up before finally finding traction and speeding away down my driveway, leaving a trail of wounded pride and frozen dignity in its wake. I sat there in the silence of my perfect house, watching the taillights disappear. There was no triumph, no joy, just a quiet, profound sense of finality. The war was over. I had won. The next morning, I received a barrage of texts from unknown numbers, which I knew were from them on borrowed phones. They were a bizarre mix of threats of lawsuits, pleas from my mother, and venomous insults from Sarah. I read none of them. I simply blocked each number as it came in and then called my lawyer. I had him draft a cease and desist letter and a restraining order, citing their attempted forced entry, which I had beautifully recorded in 4K resolution. I had them delivered by courier that afternoon. The silence that followed was absolute. Days turned into weeks, then months. Spring arrived, and the world outside my windows turned green and vibrant. I swam in my pool, worked on new projects, and even started seeing someone, a wonderful woman who was an architect and appreciated the clean lines of my home and my life. My family became a ghost story, a dark chapter I was slowly closing the book on. One day, about a year later, a letter arrived. It was on plain paper with a return address I didn't recognize, but the handwriting was my mother's. I almost threw it away. But curiosity, a final lingering thread, made me open it. It wasn't a plea or a demand. It was a 2-line note. "The boiler is broken again," she wrote. "I've called a plumber. His name is Mr. Henderson. He charges a lot, but he seems very capable. I hope you are well." And that was it. It was the closest thing to an apology, an admission of defeat that I would ever get. She wasn't asking me to fix it. She was just telling me. It was a white flag, a recognition that the old world was gone, and I was no longer a part of it, no longer their handyman on call. I folded the letter and put it away. I felt a strange sense of peace. The cold was finally gone, not just from their house, but from mine. Standing there, looking out at the sun setting over the endless ocean, I realized I hadn't just bought a villa. I had bought my freedom, and it was worth every single penny.